Okay, so we're live for the after show. I'm going to try to just let it run. I'm going to be running around doing things inside the house, but um, let's continue. I'm going to go ahead and post the link in the live chat.
That's quite.
So can you guys hear me? Oh my god.
Oh my God! It seems to be difficulty.
It's echoing.
Echoing. I guess it's your message.
I'm going to try
I'm going to try to refresh. Do you have YouTube? Someone.
Do-do-do.
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 I'm just going to mute you, Yanov. You seem to be echoing quite a lot.
Is that any better?
Yeah, I think it's Yanov that's echoing.
You think it's me?
I was on mute.
So when you need mutes, I'm not hearing the echo.
Good.
So Simon, you were asking a question. Why don't you go ahead? Like I said, I'm going to be absent, but I'll go ahead and let it run.
Okay, I'll do my best. Yeah, I'm still struggling with some of the nuance here, so I'm not sure the best way into it. It
How are
seemed
you
to me,
tonight, man?
yeah, not bad, thank you, Blue.
All right, good. All right.
Good. I'd like to go through the predictions. That was the ones that I wanted to go through. I mean, yeah, from a more friendly side, so we could just get through them. Jack, do you want to just read them out one at a time, and then, or somebody else, if you save Jack's voice for a little while. Up to you guys. No, go ahead, Jack.
Well, I can. I mean, I don't know how they're long. I mean, it's sort of a long thing that I wrote up, so I'm not sure where I could post it.
I've only really got the side chat myself, so that's not good, I suppose. I got the first one, falling profits over an expansion. And that's due to, I guess he's saying, this equalization factor of all the businesses catching up with each other to mechanize and reduce the amount of labor that they produce goods with, thereby increasing the surplus of that labor in itself.
Let's see where I can.
Decreasing the surplus value.
Oh yeah, it's in. I was able to post it
Increasing
in the
it.
external chat.
Increasing because each worker now produces more of the product per hour.
I think the idea is that because of the organic, the amount that's contributed by non-labor factors to the production process means that there's less of a differential you can make in terms of the differential between the value of labor power and the value of the goods produced. So therefore less profit. So less surplus value is what I was saying.
Okay, yeah, right. Okay, my misunderstanding, yeah. So, but it still would be true then that each laborer produces more product per hour.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right.
Is Jack really quiet for anybody else?
Yeah.
I'm
Yes.
quiet.
Yeah, you're quiet, Jack. I don't know why.
That's weird. I don't know what's causing that.
Okay, so
Prediction of a rising rate of inequality as a long-term trend.
okay, so that's saying that the amount of wealth is owned by fewer people over time.
Well, the idea is that the total remuneration to labor as a proportion of the total value produced will be a decreasing fraction of the total value product.
Okay, you're still really quiet. I'm going to try and turn you up, Jack. All right, there we go. That should be better.
Do you want me to repeat what I said?
Yes, please, for me.
The idea is that the proportion of the total value product that should be remunerated to labor should be a decreasing fraction of the total
Right,
value
yeah.
product.
Okay. Okay. And and of course that's been borne out certainly in terms of the amount of income to debt ratio, number one, and number two, I guess compared to the value of housing as well.
Well, there's a very substantial literature on rising inequality, substantial empirical literature on that.
Mhm.
That's well known and been widely discussed. I mean, that's not something that is the province merely of Marxists. So somebody like Thomas Piketty has done very a significant amount of research on that question. He wrote a best-selling book on that, you know, that was widely reviewed and discussed. So it's not like some secret. Significant amount of research on that question.
Yeah.
I can barely hear Jack.
I can try rejoining. Let's see.
Yeah, please. I did have you at maximum, so. Okay, so number 4.
Ongoing struggle over the length of the working day
Oh my
between labor.
Well, now that if that isn't the story of my lifetime, right? Yeah, my first job was 33 hours a week. My last job was more like 60, 70.
But is that really a consequence of labor theory of value?
Yes.
It's not just a consequence of the firm wanting to maximize the productivity of each worker.
Well, as I understand it, well, I mean, you could offer an alternative hypothesis as to what explains that. What I'm just saying is that the labor theory of value offers an explanation for why we should expect to see that. So I posted this in the wrong external chat. Let me post it here. Sorry. Okay, it should be in the external chat now.
Okay, well, that one seems pretty nailed on for me anyway. There would be one small test, which is when I noticed it, I noticed it in terms of reducing workers' rights in terms of moving the workforce into part-time jobs. So yeah, that's when I first noticed it, that actually you could work 2 part-time jobs for the same length of time as a full working week and earn less and still be on minimum wage. But anyway, so maybe if that's a prediction, that the workforce becomes dissipated into ever smaller enclaves.
What does the word immiseration mean?
Become relatively poor. No, it means
Poorer.
become
Oh.
poorer. It means become poorer, but it's relative rather than absolute immiseration. So it just means
Yeah, I would
that-
explain that with rent. Because the value of rent in a given area will, because land is not the kind of thing that's produced, the rent can always rise to basically to the point where the worker has no disposable income. Like even if a low skilled worker receives a wage, that just increases the price floor that a landlord could charge for rent, and therefore, though their total income is rising, they feel just as poor because their disposable income continually goes to the landlord rather than to his own disposable, whatever his leisure time would allow him to have.
Well, I mean, I mean, I'm not sure. I'd have to look carefully. You'd have to show me carefully how that.
Yeah,
How
that's
that
that's
plays
Henry
out.
George's idea.
Yeah, I mean, I don't. Do people still subscribe to Georgist economics?
They're out there. Yeah, that's just one of the points that he made, was that that there's an explanation for why the poor seem poorer, even though the total output of the economy is large, and that's because for every increase that they receive in terms of their wage, it's just extracted by rent. It just goes straight to the landlord, because then there's nothing stopping a landlord for charging a higher price for his rent, because I mean it's not like he can go anywhere. He's too poor to have his own house, and so they feel poor for that reason.
But is there a way to test that claim?
Yeah, there was one test. I don't exactly go looking for it, but there was one test that was claimed to have been noticed, that the average wage prior to the there's this business who there was this area where they had to go to cross some body of water, and prior to that the people worked for a certain wage, and then when the ferry was introduced where they could go back and forth and trade, they could drive and commute to a better job, and the average worker there got an increase of like 6 pence or something like that. And then the prediction that was made is that the rent should rise by about 6 pence. If you take an average renter, or maybe like the average renter who's renting at a low rent, you could examine the increase in rent and compare that to the average increase in his wage, and see if they match up.
Yeah, but I mean, has it been studied systematically?
I have no idea. It just seems it's plausible to me because I can think causally through it.
I see.
Seems likely to me, having lived through my life, and that is the experience I've had. So,
Well, one thing I would like to add to this discussion is to point out that Marx would include ground rent as a form of extraction of surplus value. So he actually lumps in ground rent, profit, and interest into general surplus value extraction. And then he would want to kind of examine the way in which surplus value is divided up between capitalists of various types, rentiers being one of them.
Yeah, that's right.
seems to me.
Well, which theory would take precedence over the other? It's kind of a weird question. If they both sort of work in tandem with each other, they don't contradict.
Well, the idea is that the labor theory of value offers a unified explanation for all those phenomena.
Right. I mean, because you can talk, like in Marx's idea of labor, you can talk about surplus value production as kind of a rent as well. For example, if a factory gets a new machinery and the worker should be paid more perhaps because their labor is producing more value for the capitalist, but the capitalist is saying, well, actually, we're going to be able to produce more, but you're going to get paid the same per hour. The worker doesn't really have much of an option to go get another job in this instance. And so it'd be the same as the worker not being able to move because they're too poor to move.
Wow. Wow.
I have to think about this.
Wow. It just blew my mind again.
So for me, I think the most important thing in thinking through the labor theory of value is essentially the idea that labor is a unique commodity in and of the fact that it can be exploited. For example, if you buy a machine for your factory, a machine shouldn't produce more value for you than you bought it for. Otherwise, it's mispriced. So a machine may be mispriced, but labor is really the only commodity that can be reproduced. That is, you can generally buy the food and shelter, etc., to support yourself with less value than it can produce through a day's labor. And so the more value the capitalist can siphon off, the more surplus value they'll be extracting.
Right.
Well, yeah, but the counter to that is that the relationship is mutually beneficial, such that the worker values working more than he values not working, or he values working there for that wage.
It's not a moral.
Under those
It's
conditions,
not a moral. It's not a
more
moral
than that.
claim. It's
Right. I know, but I was just responding to the exploitation point. That I couldn't consider it
what
the
I'm
exploitation.
saying is that exploitation is not a moral notion in Marx.
Right, but it has a
purely
moral
technical.
connotation.
Well,
Well, whether it has a moral connotation or not is beside the point. It's a purely technical term in Marx. It just means the differential between the quantity of value produced in the workday and the value of the worker's labor power. That's all that exploitation refers to, the fact that capitalists get to pocket that difference because of the way the labor contract works. Right? It doesn't have to have any moral implications at all. You could take that to be a good thing. And in fact, Marx is explicit that that's not unequal exchange. He says very forcefully and clearly that the worker is actually paid the full value of his labor power. Right? So there isn't any unequal exchange taking place in the labor contract for Marx.
He's paid the full value.
The full value of his labor power, not the full value that the worker produces in the work day, but the full value of his labor power.
Which labor power is a fancy way of saying like the food and material possessions that he needs to continue laboring the next day.
Well, that's what determines the value of labor power. But the labor power, specifically that commodity, is the capacity of the worker to work that work day. And what determines the value of that is going to be things like the average bundle of consumer goods that would be necessary for the worker to reproduce that capacity. And so that's going to be things like fake news was adducing.
I would like to go back and talk a little bit about the moralistic aspect of this, though, because Marx actually does talk about that a bit. And basically,
well, what he says is that there is an inequality of power such that the worker has no choice but to accept the labor contract if he wants to survive. So that, there is a moral dimension there. But again, I don't think anybody has to share Marx's morality with respect to that question for the labor theory of value to be a good scientific theory, right? You could be pro-capitalist and think the labor theory of value was a good theory.
Right. But I do want to point out that, under this sort of theory, or the world that we're living in a world of generalized commodity production, right? Where people are paid and buy their way towards subsistence, right? And we have a tendency, when we think about the economy and the society that we live in, to treat this as a sort of universal way of life that has existed from time immemorial, when in fact Marx outlines this historical process in which peasants were kind of expropriated of their traditional land rights and forced into the city to become the manufacturing proletariat through legal reforms and through lots of violence throughout many centuries.
Yeah, Marx talks about that in his chapter on primitive accumulation in volume 1 of Capital.
So, prediction number 5. Is it 5 that we're on?
Yeah, I think 4 and 5 are similar.
Okay, well, we could move on to 6 then. I haven't got them in front of me, so somebody else will have to read it out.
Oh. No, 4 and 5 deal with because if 4 is an increase in the physical ratio of machinery to current labor as a secular trend. And then number 5 says a secular tendency for technological change to substitute machinery for labor, even in capitalist economies which are labor abundant.
Oh, wow.
Or capital scarce.
Yeah, okay, well, that's pretty true as well then, okay. Certainly in terms of like China, etc., the first is true, and in what we would call mature democracy, mature economies, then
what I'm not
move to service sector, right?
What I'm not sure on is whether or not you have to accept the idea that there's a such thing as surplus value in order to take, like, you could take an aspect of the labor theory of value and just saying that the less total labor as a unit is desirable for someone who's trying to decrease or trying to increase their productivity, and in competition, then you're going to see more automation. Like, I wouldn't see that as being surprising, but I don't think I ever invoked the idea of surplus value in that.
Well, okay, so then it comes to the use of that term, isn't it? I mean, that's where you're not seeing a use for that term, are you?
Right. You see, so like I can make the whole.
Whereas I actually do see the use of.
It seems like I can see why the whole thing would happen just in only dealing with the part of the theory dealing with the capitalist wanting to derive more productivity from each worker, and even to the point that he would want to automate, not even have the labor cost, the smaller labor
right
total would.
Okay, so let's say that extreme happens. What position does that leave the
That's
market?
a prediction of the theory. That's a prediction that you'll see more automation, basically. But I don't see how that's. I never invoked surplus value there.
Right.
I didn't appeal to that at all. So I don't see why that would be something that I could just understand that capitalists want a. I can just understand why capitalists would tend to automate without.
Well, I mean,
appealing
there's 2 points, right? First is that you're able to predict all those things with the same theory, right? And to predict them for the most part as novel facts, right? So we're not actually, after the trend has been observed in most of these cases, trying to come up with individual explanations for each of those trends, right? we're saying that here's a theory, and it's going to predict, a bunch of different things, some of which have not been observed hitherto. Let's see if it comes true, right? So that's two different explanatory virtues there: predicted novelty and explanatory scope. Now, it's possible somebody could come up with individual explanations for each of those things, largely post hoc. And maybe you could find a way to tie them together into a theory. I don't think that's been done.
I mean, I don't see, where does can we go through the mechanism for how it would predict the automation and what exactly is appealed to in that prediction?
Yeah, the idea is that if you have an increase in C and a decrease in V, you can get you will have an advantage relative to your competitors who haven't adopted the labor-saving technology.
And that's because V, well, can you explain that relationship?
So the idea is you have a certain capital outlay of constant capital and variable capital, right? And capitalists are always going to be incentivized, because of competition, to adopt labor-saving technology, which increases the productivity of labor. Because if it increases the productivity of labor, right, they can...
You get more with fewer people.
Yes, exactly. So, you buy a machine that maybe lasts you 10 years, right? And in each production cycle, you, can, let's say, fire 20 workers, the wages of which will add up to more than what you've spent on the machine and what you'll have to spend on the machine in 10 years when you replace it.
Yeah, I guess I'd like to point out that under the labor theory of value, if you look at the very long term, replacing or increasing automation doesn't necessarily increase the value of your products. So basically the idea is
it decreases it.
Right. So say you have your firm, right, and you employ 100 people, and you adopt some new labor saving technology. So you end up start producing a lot more products, right, with this new technology. So the idea is that the prices in the marketplace, since you're the first people to adopt this new technology, don't necessarily reflect the fact that what you're producing is less valuable, right? Because you're still using the same amount of labor. So per unit product, the product is less valuable, right, in terms of labor time, because that's the only thing we're talking about.
In terms of labor time, it's probably not a rebuttal theoretically here, but as we automate, we have several things that we used to do by hand at work that we now have as automated, and it's actually a heck of a lot more consistent over time as far as our chemical concentrations and temperatures and things like that in our actual production. And so we're freed up not to be kicked off the workforce, so to speak, but we're freed up to have probably more people in QC and have better products. And so that would have the same number of people working the same things, but we have better products. And as a result, we would be able to have an advantage over our competitor.
And so, right, so you have an advantage. So, whether it be through better products, more products, what have you, the individual capitalist has an advantage, which leads them to gain more short-term profits, right? But eventually, that type of automation should become like industry standard, right? If the savings are compelling enough. at which point you'll be back to the same situation where the level of profits that can be made are simply based on the labor employed, as opposed to the differential between this the old market price and this new technology that's permeating the marketplace.
Right. But yeah, the point that I was trying to get off my train of thought for a second. So the point that I was responding to, that it's not necessarily a fall in value of the product when you automate, unless you assume that the goods are homogeneous, that they're identical before and after the automation.
I guess if you're assuming, I mean, operating under the labor theory of value, the value of the product depends on the labor put into the product rather than like the quality of the good or what have you. So, you know, for an identical or even better good can become less valuable over time because production processes improve. And that's actually a goal of the capitalists. They want to improve production processes to make the basket of goods that workers need to survive less valuable, so they have to pay, so they can pay them less.
Yeah. So if you had a totally automated economy, the value would be zero.
That's correct. Yeah, and the idea is that capitalism would collapse because there's no real way to make a profit.
Am I right in understanding that's the abstraction? Right. So you would say in mathematics that plus epsilon, and as time goes on, epsilon becomes smaller and smaller to the point where there is no profit. In effect.
Well, yeah, the basic idea is that as the economy approaches total automation, that a smaller, the source of surplus value is constantly shrinking. And so that's putting powerful downward pressure on the rate of profit. And when that happens, you disincentivize capitalists in engaging in production, right? And what you get is a sudden contraction in production, a balance of payments crisis, massive unemployment, and so forth, right? And that's just going to be a lot more violent under those conditions than they are under ordinary conditions, because the same basic thing is happening, even according to the theory, even in the ordinary downward slope of the business cycle, right? So, you know, when you get a crash, even an ordinary crash, even just a recession, it's basically got the same causal explanation. But under those conditions, it's going to be a lot more extreme, because it's going to be a lot harder for capital to find a way out under those conditions.
Right. So my question is that, you know, just like when we talk about how, you know, the second one firm in the marketplace is the first one who increases productivity, then the rest of the market will follow, and then they'll be back where they started, where there's no advantage to one or the other. Wouldn't it, if it's supposed to be unsustainable, wouldn't it have to be the case that you never, not that you never would reach a point like that, but that theoretically that could continue going on forever and ever and ever, as opposed to just reaching a final equilibrium where you've reached the maximum feasible.
Well, there's a debate. There's a debate about that. So that's a fairly complicated issue. But there are different views on that.
Yeah, it's like.
But
so
if you want, if you want to read about that, I mean, I can direct you to some literature on that. But yeah, it's not entirely clear to me why, if that was the only mechanism for why capitalism would be endangered, why you couldn't have, you know, colossally productive machinery, you know, that was cheapening commodities to, you know, an extreme degree. It doesn't seem intuitively plausible or likely that would happen, but it seems like it might be possible. But it does seem like some Marxist economists do argue that it's basically impossible. And I've just never really understood that argument. So, I'd like to talk with them and see if I could get them to lay it out. I've never found a good explication of that in the literature.
Yeah, because it seems to me like once you've gone so far in terms of productivity, there seems to be a limit to human capacity to even.
Yeah, the claim that they make is that the way to summarize the way that they put the claim is they say that the work day is finite, right? But the increase in the organic composition of capital, which is what causes the rate of profit to decline, is infinite. It can continue to rise, right? Hours in the workday that they could, expand the workday to, and they're going to hit a finite limit. So somehow there's a claim that because one is finite and because the other is finite, can't really overcome it. But it's not really, I've never really seen that argued in some, explicit fashion where I can see all the steps in the argument. Like intuitively, it has some plausibility to me, but I just don't fully understand the argument. So I don't try to defend that claim yet, because if they're correct about it, because I don't.
Did he cut out? Oh, he muted himself.
Can you repeat the specific claim that you're wondering about again?
Say that again. Sorry.
Can you repeat your question, please?
Right. So, we talked earlier about how there would be a situation where one firm increases the productivity of his workers, and that gives him that short-term advantage in profit over his competitors. And then the argument is that, well, then the competitors will take on and more, let's say they take on the exact same innovation, and so that it causes the rest of the market to catch up to the first guy who innovated. That's the reason why the profits are going to tend to decrease. But it seems to me that it's perfectly plausible that for most industries, there's kind of a limit to just how much productivity we can squeeze out of each worker. Like even if we automate that, at some point, the workers are going to be just as productive as they're going to be. And you have several players in the marketplace, and they're competing in terms of maintaining whatever status they have as businesses. But nobody is actually capable, even if they do continue to invest in R&D or whatever, that no one is actually going to make that further step. And so at some point, capitalism we would just have this really, really productive capitalist economy. Nobody's really revolting or anything, and it's not collapsing. It's just as productive as it's going to get.
So I guess I have a couple of thoughts on this. One, in this kind of end state, so I guess we're assuming that the whole economy can't be entirely automated, right? Because if things could be totally automated and humans kind of taken out of the production process entirely, then there is a breakdown, right? I think we're in agreement. So let's say that we're at the steady state of productivity, right? And so the question is, what happens to profits, right? Can profits continue at a certain rate while the productivity does not increase? And I would suggest to you that profits cannot continue, and growth cannot continue. Economic growth cannot continue in a steady state. Like you're
I would agree that growth can't happen because growth is stemmed from productivity, I think.
So that means that profits at that point become kind of either zero-sum games, right? And by the way, this is kind of the same situation that happens at the end of a business cycle, which is basically you're talking about your firm invests in labor saving technology, right? And they get all these profits initially, and they have this advantage. And other people in the industry say, wow, like, look at the profits this company is getting. Like, a lot of investment flows into that sector, right? And all of this investment is expecting some sort of return. And usually it's like the return that the first couple of successful companies are getting. But the problem is when all this investment comes into the sector, then the rate of profit falls, right? And then there's no return, right? Or there isn't this sort of expected return. And so then there are a couple ways in which capitalists can, because the difference between capital and just money, right, is capital, the point of capital is to increase, is to augment itself. And so now they're living in this zero-sum situation, which is kind of the same situation you described if productivity gains stop entirely in the end state of capitalism. And so in this zero-sum situation, there are a finite number of ways to gain the profit that you're looking for. One is to exploit your workers more, right? That's a possibility. And as the situation becomes more dire, the attempts at exploitation will become more brutal. Two is to expand expand your market. That provides kind of the impetus towards imperialism, right? Either through exporting capital to where labor is cheaper, or getting cheaper raw resources through the conquest of new territories. And this is kind of forms the backbone of the theory of how capitalism expands and self-perpetuates. And so the two arguments I can see for how this sort of end state of capitalism would collapse is, one, as the capitalist system expands to engulf the whole world, which it pretty much has since Marx's time, right? And this is one of the things that Lenin and Luxemburg talked about a lot in the early 20th century. How long could capitalism last? And Luxemburg argued that there was this huge exploitable world out there, and it would take a very long time she said, you may as well, you could wait forever for the rate of profit to start declining. And that's because every time there is this sort of crisis, there is this new moment of primitive accumulation or accumulation by dispossession, in which capitalists can use power, sometimes even naked military power, to grab the profits or grab the resources to make their investments that would otherwise be unprofitable profitable. And so the kind of idea is, when you get to this end steady state, that the only way to improve productivity or improve profits, not productivity, further is through exploitation of the workers. At that point, the workers will be fed up by that. I mean, you can't just exploit people infinitely, right? They're without productivity gains, there's no reasons for the workers to kind of stand for increased exploitation.
Right. So yeah. So what I would see there is the the same reason that they don't endlessly exploit their workers today is because there's a supply and demand for labor, and limit to just how much they could abuse or pull out of each individual worker, and there's a limit to how much they could feasibly innovate in terms of their productivity. And so at some point you reach an equilibrium. And
I'm dubious. Dubious given American history since late 70s.
I'm not sure what you mean.
Well, I mean, I believe that the average wage has declined in comparison to the living wage.
Right, but then you could also look at periods where it didn't.
There is.
I mean, there's explanations for that wouldn't just be.
There hasn't been any in recent American history.
Not in the last 20 or 30 years, but I'm not sure what America has to do with anything.
Well,
I'm not speaking about it
for a start during that period.
Right. I mean, they didn't go to zero, did they? We're not working for a dime.
My question for you,
no, it's just been steadily decreasing.
Is in your steady state world of constant non-growing productivity, how does somebody make a profit? What is the mechanism by which profit can be made?
the average profit will be zero. The economy itself, I think, would be organic, would wax and wane in terms of one sector growing while one might not grow as needs change throughout the economy. I wouldn't think that it's particularly necessary for each. I wouldn't envision a society where there's like this final state of businesses out there to where the average profit, the total profit in the economy is increasing.
Right. So you don't, in this world of zero average profit, I mean, that to me, that sounds like a world of brutal competition where companies will go to any means necessary.
It's not even possible in a modern economy. You can't have zero growth. Companies will die. Shares will reduce in value.
So I'm asking, what would happen if companies would do,
No. People invest for two different reasons. On the one hand, they invest because they think that they can get more, that they'll see some return on their investment. But on the other hand, they invest to secure what they have. And so you would just see that constituting the bulk of things. But there still will be profits and losses. And just be on a macro scale that they'll balance out. Because
it seems a little bit naive to me that you wouldn't think that there will still be people that want more and are willing to go to extreme ends in order to secure.
Well, that state's not going to change.
Well, money will chase the companies. Money will chase the companies which are still returning profits. Yep. Right, those that don't, right, their shareholders, well, their shares will get sold, and they will become
right. But then, when they sell shares, they're moving money from one place to another. Yeah. But if they don't see a higher return in another area, they're not going to pull their money out.
Sure. Thanks for interrupting. And then, once that happens, of course, the share value decreases, and that's why companies can't have zero, growth. Growth is inherent in the modern system of companies and shares. I mean, there's just no way you could ever have or conceive of companies posting zero growth.
Well, part of the reason we have to have growth is because of inflation.
Well, in crashes, potentially, companies can get away and write off a lot of profits, but
some companies
they still won't post zero growth. I mean, it's just not
talking about zero aggregate growth. I mean, we only have like
no. Listen. You're talking about an individual company in a transient state of the economy. We're talking about steady state, where every single industry, or where these industries have matured to be as productive as they can be. But that doesn't mean that you'll never invest in the stock of a company that is doing a good job of what it does, because it still has to have.
It's making less and less profit, right?
It still has to be a safe store of your wealth.
It's making less and less profit, right?
No, that's not true. This company can grow. It's just at the expense of other companies, right? It's a total zero-sum game.
Right. So money is going to be chasing around the companies, and those companies that don't produce growth.
But it's already doing that now.
Are going to.
But
that's not a change.
Right.
Without productivity growth, how do you produce growth? The competition will come through exploitation of labor, right? There's no technology gains to be.
No, we're assuming a period of where there's no productivity gain, and there's no growth.
So the value of the company decreases.
No.
Okay.
Like look. You still have
been built on the fact.
Like you still have companies out there that are producing goods for people who need them, right? The money is not going to just disappear off the planet because they don't see a 1 or 2% increase in their productivity or profit over time. They're still producing the goods. Like the machines still exist, the products still exist. They're still being produced. They're still going to people. People are still generating income, and they're using that income to buy those products. And so there's no magic thing that ends up making machines no longer work or any of that stuff happening. And so there's no real reason that you might change. You might pull your money out of one stock because you think there's a better stock out there, or you might pull your money out of one stock because you think that the QC department in that particular company has degraded in their quality, and so you might shift into a different industry. But there's nothing producing people from storing their wealth exactly the way they do now. It's just that you don't have the same expectations of returns, or even if you did, it wouldn't matter because there's no alternative where you can go to. But it's not as though I don't see a mechanism for why it would just collapse all of a sudden.
Well, I wasn't saying anything about all of a sudden, that's for certain. But
let's take this world where there are two shoe companies, and they use the same technology to produce shoes. They have the same productivity per worker. Which company is going to be the profitable one? Is it going to be the one that's paying its worker more or less?
Less, but that doesn't change. I mean, that's true now, but they still don't pay them $0 now.
The company that has workers that work more hours or fewer hours?
More hours.
And so that means that money will chase companies that figure out ways.
It does now, though.
Yeah, it does now, but it will then as well.
Yeah, well, that's one.
Right. So you're describing a situation which all of the incentives that you are describing now are present today. Right. But it's not true. But even though, mathematically speaking, you could you can maximize your profits by having zero wages. That's true today, as it is 100,000 years from now. That you could have you could not pay your workers anything at all, or you could pay them 5 cents, and that's true.
You can't.
That same advantage is true today, and as it is under that situation.
Yes, I think it's
not happening.
And presumably, that's the ideal situation for a capitalist.
What is?
To pay the workers nothing.
Yeah. Right.
Oh yeah, sure.
Well,
the goal is a high living standard, or the goal is
it's ridiculous to say, then, right? If it's ridiculous to say that they'll just get paid nothing, and therefore this doesn't work, right? Well, if they're getting,
I didn't say they wouldn't be paid.
That is what the capitalists want.
That's your argument.
Capitalists want. They're never going to get it, of course, because nobody would do it.
But listen. The flip side of that is that the worker would love to be paid $1 million.
Yeah.
He would love to be paid $1 trillion. The two have to meet a mutually beneficial in their individual eyes.
Right. So that
relationship.
That's called the power. What we're calling that, the power of labor. And Marx is saying that the worker gets their full amount. Right, because the worker won't go and work unless they do get what they need. If they don't get what they need, they won't survive, so they won't be working.
Right.
Right. So again, right, that's taken into account already. So your objection, right?
No, I mean it's under my situation too.
Right, and but the big difference between the situation that you're outlining without productivity growth and the situation that that exists currently, where all these incentives to exploit workers do exist, but there is a growth in productivity. The big difference is the growth in productivity, right? Because productivity continues to grow, then workers can be continually more exploited while still having their standards of living materially rise, or at least stay the same, right? But
but the incentive for the capitalist is already to absolutely minimize however much he's paying for labor. That is already the incentive.
That's true, but in a world of no productivity growth, the only way to do that is by making labor's material situation worse and worse, right?
Yeah, but that's already true now. What I'm saying is, just because there's not this alternative method of doing it anymore doesn't negate the fact that they're already trying whatever they can do to minimize it today. And so the fact that there isn't this alternative method of increasing profits does not mean that all of a sudden that wages could fall to 0 or 5 cents or a penny or whatever at the whim of the capitalist. He's still at mercy of the labor. The demand from the labor.
What I'm saying is that this would be the sort of I'm giving you my opinion as to why this sort of zero growth situation that you're talking about would probably lead to a sort of a revolution, because the only way of increasing profits would be increased exploitation, as opposed to a non-zero sum game of increased productivity, right? Once you take that away and you only have exploitation, then eventually you're going to get workers sick of being, if you try to push their wages lower, then the value of their labor power, eventually you're going to get a revolt.
Right, but if their living standards are high enough to where they see it as a mutually beneficial relationship and not one of exploitation, then the psychology of the laborer is exactly the way it is today. That there's no change all of a sudden because there's no extra alternative.
Do you know how things were 30 years? Do you know how things were 30 years ago? Really?
Better?
Well, less hours a week for more money. Let's put it that way. Less money in terms of price, but in terms of value, higher.
But you're not responding to what I'm saying.
Well, I just think, I am responding in that, yes, I agree that that's the natural tendency of capitalism, right? So, yes, we're on the same page there.
No, you don't agree.
Well, that's, of course.
You're strawmanning me a little.
Not at all, right? Because you're making it, you want it to seem like it's some kind of moral dilemma. It's not a moral dilemma.
I didn't.
Right?
I think the problem is...
No, I'm
this is naturally how companies work, right?
The problem is that...
Right, but it's how they work now.
It's how they've always worked. I mean,
In this...
Right, but we don't have a revolt now. Oh, sorry.
Because going through periods, every 11, 12 years, right, of continual boom bust expansion, right, contraction, right. Now the last one was quite a big one, all right, but in my lifetime I've been through several others where negative equity has been a real thing in the market.
Right.
So those are bad things happening.
I don't dispute that, but I don't credit that
that's
to
a sign.
capital.
That's a sign that what we're talking about is right now over the period.
No, I mean that's like a dispensationalist looking at the Middle East for prophecy.
So now over that period, at the same time, the value of our labor, right, on average, certainly at the lower end, has been decreasing in comparison to what we can afford. All right, now at the same time, all right, things like bread has become cheaper, right, because of expanding conquests, right? We're getting products now from across the other side of the world where we weren't before, and they're making them a lot cheaper than we ever could.
Right, but that doesn't...
All of these things, right, are coming together, right, into a perfect storm, and that's the prediction that the theory of value of labor is able to make, that all of these things are predicted, not just one or two of them.
Listen, you're not saying any fact about the world that I'm disagreeing with here.
Right.
Like what we're talking about was that steady state where there's no growth, and the claim is that capitalism will collapse on no growth, and I'm disputing that claim.
Right. Okay. Because you're still looking at other forms of growth, right? That's why. So it's been explained that under certain circumstances,
right,
where there is no more growth under terms of
it's not like they're doing it one at a time. They're right now, as we speak, minimizing the amount that they spend on labor.
I like to address your point directly here. And so the way that I understand it, you're conceiving of this zero growth economy. And companies are still fighting each other for market share, et cetera, et cetera. But under your kind of conception of this economy, the productivity is per worker is so high that workers are pretty well treated, right? And they still, things are cheap, life is good, so it doesn't really matter that they're being exploited. Am I correct in saying that? And it doesn't matter that there's no growth.
Well, I mean, what is defined technically as exploitation, I don't consider to be exploitation.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So I think I understand what you're saying, and I guess my contention here is that in this zero-sum environment, well, first of all, if there's going to be a large superfluous population, right? Depending on how high, if productivity is very high, there will be like this superfluous population that doesn't really need to exist in order to produce goods. But even if there isn't, I'm telling you that according to the labor theory of value, the capitalist or this sort of system will not maintain these high standards of living for the workers because the drive for each individual company will be to exploit their workers as much as possible in terms of living conditions, in terms of wages, whatever they can. Whatever cost they can cut, they will try to cut because of competition, right? Especially because there's a zero-sum game, right? You need to cut all the costs you can, and that means going to extreme means in order to cut the living standards of your workforce, and eventually that should lead to like instability. I guess.
Okay, so yeah, the main point that I am trying to make, I guess I could make another separate point, but the main point that I was trying to make is that this is sort of treating the minimization of labor costs as though it's something that's being staved off by the profits that are due to increase in productivity. Whereas
Yes,
what I'm
yeah.
saying is that right now, simultaneously, they are minimizing the cost that they spend on labor
Yes,
maximally. And
it's true. That's true.
that, right. And so if it was the case that simply in and of itself, the strong desire to minimize labor costs would cause working conditions to be so bad that people revolt, or whatever it would be, then we're into that situation now, and there's no reason why.
You know, there was workers' struggle to lower the work week to 40 hours. I mean, there was a lot of progress
Right.
made throughout the 19th and 20th century, which is
Right, and that's one of the reasons. That's one of the reasons that we don't have. One of the reasons we don't have 24/7 or 80-hour work weeks right now.
Yep, that's
is precisely because there's a demand on the labor side for decent working conditions and
this isn't
good working hours.
Economic demand; it's a political demand.
No, it's an economic demand, because, like, even if you look at why they're outsourcing to foreign labor, is because foreigners at the moment stand to benefit, even if they're at worse working conditions relative to ours.
Right, but
but American laborers are not willing to. Well, it is statutory that we have a minimum wage.
And again,
but
you'll notice that the exploitation of foreign labor corresponds with the decline in American wages and the decoupling of American wages from productivity.
Right. No, I agree with that.
So in a zero growth world, the strategy of the capitalist is to pit worker against worker.
The strategy of the capitalist is always to minimize whatever he's spending on labor. And
Yes.
that doesn't change based on whether or not he's growing, or he could be shrinking.
No, but the situation of the worker.
Say that again?
The situation of the worker changes if there is no growth in productivity. Because the worker can see an increase in their exploitation, but also an increase in their living standards if there is a growth in productivity. If there's no growth in productivity, then it's a zero-sum game, right?
Right, but as long as his living standards are acceptable, then he's not going to revolt.
Right, but I guess I would say that this cycle in like global...
Unless your prediction is that American living standards are going to just become worse and worse simply as a result of profit, which is just directly false.
Well, they have been declining.
Right, but as productivity increases, the living standards will increase. I mean, they're high now. They're higher than they've ever been in history.
Now it depends what you mean by living standards.
That's
if you mean what you could afford, right, then that's a completely different thing to living standards, because basic prices of basic white goods, especially, and even farm goods.
Of white goods.
Say again?
There are periods. I mean, grinding poverty is a natural state of man. It's not Google Hangouts and car rides and clean environments and running water.
What I'm saying to you is living standards of those particular goods have gone up, right?
The cost of those things?
No, they've gone down. The costs of those things, as we've sent manufacturing abroad, right?
Right.
Then the price of those things have gone down. So that, of course, feels like it's an increase in living standards, right?
It is.
It is. Okay. So you can spend more of your money on, or you can spend less of your money on cheaper goods, right? Because the other costs have gone through the roof. The actual cost of living, like the costs on insurance, the costs on
which I would blame on rent.
Hang on, housing, energy, right? All of those costs have gone through the roof. The only costs that have diminished are things like TVs, washing machines, basic food.
Right. So everything that you're explaining that is sold on the actual relatively free market, the open market, you see the cost of those things decreasing, but the highly regulated industries and manipulated industries are increasing.
If you wish to say it that way, you can.
And areas where
basically, I'm saying
a government would grant them a monopoly.
wherever you've transferred the labor abroad to cheaper labor, you've got cheaper goods. And wherever you get the business in-house, right, in the tertiary sector, then you've got more expensive goods.
They're more expensive. I do agree. I do think that it's sort of heterogeneous.
Right. And what's that done compared to the average wage? Because I can tell you, it's a decrease in the cost in the standards of living.
A decrease in cost of living and a.
When you take into account,
defending.
When you take into account those costs, right? There's an actual decrease in the
right. We could subsidize college education and drive the price through the roof.
That's contrary to the point you just made and have been asserting for some time. And I don't understand why you're asserting
what point was that
actually the cost of living or the standard of living has gone up, because I don't think it has, in real terms. Right, the amounts that we're spending, right, has actually gone down. The value of our wages compared to what we can get, compared to what we used to get, has gone down, not up. So, even though we can afford more white goods.
I think you're just bashing productivity. I mean, I don't see anything.
Not in the country anymore. They did that. We've got rid of that now, right? That's gone to people who do it for cheaper with less good working conditions.
I agree.
Right, and that's the tendency which Marx is pointing out. Look, here's the exploitation of workers, and there it is. And it's not just
right, but you're making
and it's not just
completely
it's not just that it's in another country, right? Which it surely is, because their working conditions are worse. But it's also in our country because at the same time, right, the cost of living is going up, right? Because houses cost more, right? Insurance costs more, electricity costs more, gas costs more, roads cost more, cars cost more. Right, so actually, standard of living, it's going down. We can afford less good cars than we used to be able to afford. Right? If it wasn't for technology, we'd be going fucking nowhere right now. Right?
Right, and if the technology just one day stopped, the only way to increase profits or to continue at the same profit rate would be to further lower.
I've already responded to that.
Even further lower.
I've already responded to that.
I don't think you have, no. Your only response is to say, well, yeah, that happens already, and that's the capitalist motive. Well, yeah, that's the point.
Yeah, it happens already.
No.
And here's the theory that predicts it.
We have wages that are non-zero in low-skilled industries. And as we speak, the capitalists are as greedy and as self-interested, selfish, and amoral and monstrous as they may be in reality. They are as greedy today as they've ever been in human history. In human history, they have never been. Maybe they're more greedy now than they've ever been. Okay, and we don't have zero wages.
Why you would keep using the word greedy when all I'm saying is capitalist?
Well,
right. What I'm saying is they have exactly the incentive structure now.
Yep. Capitalist. Yeah.
But you have the implication that you are claiming would be there in a zero growth environment, and you don't see the result.
It would be more so in a zero-sum growth. It would be much more so. In fact, it would be the only way to increase profit.
Right, and the only reason that you say that is, or that you could say that, is on the assumption that right now they're staving off how badly they could treat their workers because they're generously saying, well, maybe we can pay them this, but we make enough profit on increasing productivity, so we can.
I think there are human ethics involved as well in that respect, but
no, right now they're minimizing it. Right now they're minimizing.
That's correct. The pressure is always to minimize it, of course. Yeah.
Right. But right now it's not zero. There's some floor.
There's still some surplus. You're correct. Yeah.
Right. And it has nothing to do with what the rate of growth in the economy. The floor on wages is.
Should we wait till it's zero?
You're not making any sense.
Well, you're saying it's not zero right now, and I'm saying no, it's not zero right now. Of course not.
It's not
But,
zero.
but should we wait till it's zero then before we do anything, or should we say, yeah, it's definitely headed towards zero. Let's do something about it.
You're assuming it will go to zero. What I'm saying is that productivity could rise.
I'm saying that's
and
the
reach an
theory.
equilibrium.
I'm saying that's the theory, and it seems to be borne out by some rather startling results over the last 50 years.
Oh
right? Which is the average length of the workers' week has increased in the number of hours without shade. There has been a retardation
I don't
of
know if
workers'
that's
rights.
maybe in 50 years, but not over the last 100 years.
There has been a decrease, right, in the value of the wages, right? Certainly
over the last 150 years.
I'm saying about 40, 50 years that I can remember.
Right, but what are the last 150 years?
Well, I wasn't around 150 years ago.
Right, or the last 100 years or 80 years.
Right.
Right. You can cherry pick a period of history where there's
it's not
the working
cherry
classes
picking.
wages are decreasing,
It's not
and then you're
cherry
attributing
picking.
that to something.
It's not cherry picking. I mean, it is literally the lifetime I've had.
Right, but capitalism existed 60 years ago, but you stopped
Sure.
at 50.
Sure, and
It
Marx
existed
made these
70, but
predictions.
you stopped at 50.
And Marx made these predictions how long ago?
Okay, I think I'm finished.
Yeah, I think so.
This is a good discussion.
Sure. Phew. Honestly. Just to say, well, it's happening. Well, yeah, that's the point. That's the point we've been saying. It's happening now, right? Even before we get to these desperate points where it's a question where the technology can't improve or there is no more countries, or in actual fact, it'll tend to be that China starts dominating, right? So much stronger manufacturing base that can control its population, right? I mean, that's the perfect Marxist state, right? Then they can have the capitalist thing going full blown and have an endless supply of workers working as cheap as they want.
Yeah. But I think his point was kind of more, why hasn't wage, or why isn't minimum wage continually decreasing since these pressures?
That's obvious, though, isn't it? It's seriously, that's fairly obvious, really, isn't it?
I mean, I guess I would say he's ignoring the political aspect of all of this.
Well, completely. I mean, that's the whole history of this country since the 80s. We had a load of riots in the 80s, and we had someone called Mrs. Thatcher come to power. And literally her attack was on the working week. I mean, that's what it was about. Everybody was lazy, and we weren't working hard enough. So that's what happened. She bribed all the poor people to vote her in, and did away with the labor laws, crushed the unions. Sold the nationalized industries, broke them all up, gave them to greedy oligarchs who just completely ripped everybody off.
Is that capitalism's fault, though, or is that the government's fault?
That's the government's fault in this case, because it was political that they did that.
Yeah.
I mean, again, if you want it, I think the moral thing that he kept bringing up was a red herring. Right? I mean, when I say exploited, I literally mean in the capitalistic sense of trying to make more money. Right, right now, if we're going to call that a crime, then I guess that's not taking capitalism seriously.
There is a field of philosophy called business ethics. So
yeah, I'm sure they dress it up, dude. But then what about the Japanese in the 70s? Right?
What about them?
Well, they had a global policy, let's say, for business. right? Which very much was about, war. Corporate ethics was more about war. Corporate competition was about war, not about ethics.
Yeah.
Hence, you get Honda and, so many Japanese companies are are global players. And it's a tiny island, right?
I feel like you guys have probably had such a good conversation, and I probably got in way too late. I really wanted to be in here because this is right in my wheelhouse, but I have obligations. So
Hey, it's been a crazy one. It's difficult to have good conversations on these type of topics because understanding is so difficult. There's such complex topics, right?
Yeah.
There's no doubt that genius, Marx was a genius.
Oh,
and
yeah.
Some of these insights are deep and profound.
But I think a lot of these insights came from Smith and Ricardo, to be honest. I mean, he really only credits himself with two different discoveries, which is the essence of value, which is abstract labor, and kind of unifying rents, ground rent, profit, and interest into one unified theory of surplus value. Those are really the only two things that Marx claims as his own. A lot of the rest comes from existing political economic thought.
Well, just putting those two things together makes a huge difference.
They're important contributions for sure.
Mm-hmm.
So what were the positions taken on the labor theory of value? And who was defending what?
Oh, you don't want to know. It was just silly. It was silly.
The first talk, was pretty incoherent.
Again, if you're going to criticize something like that, I think you've got to try and avoid the basic cliches of, the stereotypes of why each position is wrong. There's no point in starting on opposing ground. You've got to start a conversation like that on common ground.
Yeah.
So again, I didn't hear any arguments which were particularly persuasive against it.
Against the labor theory of value?
Yeah.
Well, the problem is that a lot of the discussants didn't really seem to understand the labor theory of value beyond maybe like a few cliches about it.
Yeah, exactly.
That was difficult. And Jack got very frustrated trying to explain it to an unwilling audience. And so it kind of degenerated from there, I would say.
Yeah, I actually, once Jack explained it the first time, I got it and kind of went away. It switched off and came back like 20 minutes later when I got it in my head exactly what was the pieces that I needed. And even now I'm not, I don't know for certain. I did want to get on to the bit about, because I kind of almost got to the next bit, I feel, where it's like as this situation arises, of course, that means we're paying less money as wages, right? As things become more mechanized, and the implications that have.
Okay.
That's where I wanted to go with it.
I came in and I was hearing something about how the end game is that there will be no wages paid.
Well, anarchy is the end game, of course, but if you were to follow it to its logical conclusion, then there would be no, there would only be the business owner working, because everything else would be automated.
Oh, well, perhaps.
That being, there's no labor to exploit in that sort of situation.
Mm-hmm.
Well, if you stop paying people, they're going to stop working for you.
Yeah.
So then there won't be products, and there won't be commodities, and then there won't be anything.
The disagreement that you probably came in on was, we were kind of talking about this, what would happen if productivity gains in productivity dried up, and what's this sort of world would look like. And I was arguing that it would be a world of increased exploitation, where if it's a zero profit gain in terms of growth, then companies would turn to more coercive methods to exploit workers. And then there was the kind of counter argument that they have the same incentives now. How do productivity gains sort of stave off this increased exploitation? Why are they not as intent or as cruel in their exploitative methods as they might be under a zero-sum regime?
Well, they would have to innovate in other ways.
Right.
There would just be innovation in other ways other than productivity. It would be a constant in the equation. So I think that's the answer. Is that what he was saying? He didn't sound like that's what he was saying.
No, yeah, I guess what do you mean by innovation in other ways?
You would break out into new markets. You would invent new products. You would find, it's,
yeah,
that's what you would want to do.
Right.
And that's the problem. That's the problem that we're in right now. Is
added value.
We don't have a new frontier that we are championing. Where we've been through, steel and the automobile and computers, the internet, and now we're 20 years without a new frontier. So it starts to degrade.
Yeah.
So if all we had were typewriters,
I remember.
If we stopped at typewriters in terms of innovation, then in theory, everyone would have a typewriter. Everyone would have tons of typewriters, and they'd all be $1 a piece. And there would be no point to paying anyone for a typewriter. They'd be valueless.
Oh, I see. That goes even further than before. Yeah, I see.
Yeah.
That's the valueless bit. Yeah. Okay.
But that's where standard of living. That's and then on the other side of things, your standard of living increases because now everyone has a typewriter.
Yeah. Oh, I see. So that's why. Yeah.
That's the paradox.
Okay, I get it. Yeah.
That's the paradox. Is
So what am I trying to express then when I'm saying that wages constitute? We can buy less with our wages now than we used to be able to. Even though we buy more products. But
I think there's two things there. I think there's it might be the same euphemism, standard of living and quality of life. But when we're talking about essentials like water that doesn't have shit in it versus everyone having a cell phone, which we are to the point where almost everyone has a cell phone. You could go get an Obama phone if you don't have the means to get a top of the line iPhone, and the top of the line
or whatever. Yeah.
And competition has driven not the cost of the phone itself down, but you make a deal with the phone company, you get a phone, you sign a contract, and you pay what you would pay any other phone company for service. So So that's the kind of the paradoxical situation you have when you have something that turns in valueless under the system of capitalism. It becomes part of the just the fabric of your quality of life.
Yeah. Hence the rent thing, because that's something that you can't do without and is an increasing cost. seems to be linked more to interest rates and house prices than it does to be to wages.
Yeah, rent's a bad thing, and really mortgages aren't all that much better, though they are a lot better.
Yeah.
So real estate is a trickier concept. Real estate's a trickier commodity because there is a finite amount of real estate. If I wanted to make you a distortion pedal for your guitar, I could make you 1 million distortion pedals for your guitar, and then I could make another 1 million distortion pedals for the guitar. The problem with real estate is there's only so much beachfront property.
Yeah.
You know, there's only one Upper West Side, and there's only so many condos over there. So
yeah, I mean, through both ways again, of course, because of course all that money that's being made is trying to find places to make money.
Right, and so the renter, the leaseor has to calculate risk, insurance, property taxes, find a way to make what he can against the risk he's taking, having a standing building there, and find someone willing to pay what he's willing to charge, what he wants to charge, as much as he can charge, and find someone to pay as little as they want to pay. And that's where you get an equilibrium price on a flat in London or wherever.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
And if
there's this making money thing again, that's the real. That's the
right.
real
Well,
that's the accelerator on capitalism.
Yeah. So capitalism operates under the one of the main assumptions is that under capitalism is that you are one would be in business. The reason why one would be in business is to make money.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Yeah. So
profit motive.
Right. And that's driven by risk. So the more risk, and if you want to file under risk, cost of goods sold and time and all that stuff, file that under risk. You come up with a value of some source that's valuable to the person who's producing the commodity. Now, whatever under the system of capitalism, whatever the producer feels his commodity is valued at is irrelevant unless he finds someone to buy it for that price.
Well, yeah. Now, maybe not quite that way though, but yeah. That's okay. Well, that's
right. So I can circle back to the labor thing.
He still can't sell. I mean, he has to sell, right? There has to be a price. He can't just go out and give it away.
Exactly. So if I were to go back to the labor thing, the business owner would like to pay the labor less than whatever he's paying them now. If you were to ask most bosses, probably 99, there's some good bosses out there, not very many. But if you were to ask most bosses out there, how much do you want to be paying employee X? The answer would always be less. So to round back,
on average, let's not get too particular about it, but yeah.
But to round back to that, in order to pay an employee less, they have to find an employee willing to be paid less.
Right.
So that's where you have competition.
So there's a little bit of friction there, basically, the sticking power, shall we say.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't disagree, but again, in my lifetime, it's as clear as day. It's absolutely as clear as day what's happened in terms of, average wages and length of working conditions, length of employment, remunerations. They've all gone,
I'd say it's been up and down. I've probably the past 30 years, there's probably been some decline.
Well, nothing but. I mean, I can't remember a year went by where we had a reduction in the length of the working week.
Right.
Doctors did. But then doctors were working like 110, 120 hours a week.
Yeah.
So they got their hours restricted to like 80 or something,
There is science behind working less and being more productive.
Yeah.
So the person,
it's a false economy. We can both agree that, but nonetheless,
Yeah. So
it's like,
yeah,
I'm doing more work than I was, even though I'm earning more money. That money's worth less. I mean, I could afford a house when I was working 33 hours a week, 35 hours a week on a minimum wage.
Yeah.
When I was walking 47 and a half, right, after 2 more crashes, right, I couldn't afford a house anymore.
Yeah, that's the fickle thing is your whatever wages you're being paid may not outrun the inflationary
not at all
trends of some markets.
Some,
yeah,
the important markets. The same thing with energy. The same thing with, But the only things I've noticed different, as I say, were possibly technology and then food. As a proportion of my wages, food has gone down.
Yeah, food's most governments subsidize food though.
Well, there we go.
For that reason.
There we go.
Being food secure is extremely important.
Mm. Yeah. So I guess Marx is right then. On all counts. Tick, tick, tick.
I think that Marx was a really smart dude. I don't think that he was right in a lot of things. I think that he was right in some things. But
I think people confuse the pessimistic thing, right? I mean, he takes it to the logical conclusions, right? But the pragmatism of humankind doesn't work that way. And there's a lot more leeway to be said. But in the round, right, or when you take it to an abstraction, I think every good capitalist should go, yeah, that's right.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of value in a lot of what he said. I think the means of production should be in the hands of the producers in a lot of cases. But where am I going with this? Well,
that's the problem. It's that we've been pushed out. I mean, there's a good example, right? Is in this country there used to be a company called the Co-op, and their policy was that their shareholders would get their profits. Okay, not unusual. However, their shareholders were their customers. Right, so they used to reward their customers with profits from the company, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so that was the model, and of course it was highly successful, as you would imagine, especially in low budget foods, right, and supermarket stuff like clothes, etc., toys, and what have you, especially on the low end, because the profits, of course, per person weren't very much that they were redistributing. But nonetheless, overall, it still meant that there was a direct reward for being a customer at that shop. Yeah, and of course they were completely pushed out and what would you call exploited by other supermarkets that were loss leading. So a supermarket would open up across the road and then lost lead for 8 months until, you know, this happened to too many of their shops, and of course they just went under.
And they just submarine them?
Yeah. Yeah. They just bought them up after that. As each one went bust, they just bought them up and put the prices up 6 months later. But, you know, that's your kind of practice that is capitalistic, right?
Yeah, that's one of them.
Yeah. And that's exactly what it seems Mark's talking about by this process of saying, well, if somebody can do it, they will go in and do it.
Yeah.
Right. Because this company couldn't compete with loss leading. Right. It was giving its profits away to its patrons. It couldn't afford to give them away to its profits. You know?
So my first thought would be,
and loss lead.
If they're giving, if they're charging their customers a price,
Mm-hmm.
and then turning around and giving the profit right back to them, my first thought would be, why don't they just charge less and forego the
Mm-hmm.
publicity stunt? That would be my first.
Yeah.
And my second one would be, it seems like this co-op was already pretty low priced, and they had a loss leader come in and submarine them, and that's pretty messed up when that happens. But these
Guys, I gotta
customers,
go. Thanks for the discussion.
Yeah, thank you, Fake. I enjoyed what you said.
see you, man.
Bye.
What was I saying all this?
So yeah, they come in lost lead. That's pretty fucked up. But
that's pretty fucked up. But it's not like the co-op chose for their customers to go over to this competition. The customers chose
Mm-hmm.
to go over to the competition.
Yeah, that is true. That is true.
Yeah. So under a different system, maybe not necessarily a Marxist system that you would want, but under a different system that would prevent that, you would take away the choice of the customer to enjoy the savings from this company who seems devious.
Yeah, well, I mean, it does seem devious to me because
It seems devious to me too.
You know, because what actually happens, and what happened in this case, right, is you know, that obviously the co-op went bust or were bought out by a bigger chain, and the prices were then put up. Right, as soon as that shop closed, then the prices got put up.
Well, yeah, they had to pay for their new acquisition. All the money they just leveraged. And
the money they just lost, right? So people actually paid, or they thought they were getting a saving. But of course, when the choice was taken away, because one of the shops had gone bust and there was a temporary, increase in prices, then of course they lost again.
Yeah.
But so yeah, I would like to outlaw that kind of practice,
Yeah.
I think loss leading is, a deceptive practice. And I also think like the 3 for 2s and that kind of shit, those should be banned as well.
Yeah. Well,
you should just give the price for one item.
Well, there are certain industries that
should be 25% off. Go ahead.
If you do that, there are certain industries that just wouldn't survive.
Fuck them.
Like, think of something silly that is typically runs in the red, like a golf course.
Right.
Most golf courses, public golf courses, and even some private golf courses run in the red all the time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, where are they getting the money from to keep running then?
Sometimes it's sometimes it's a public course, and other times it's a person who owns other businesses.
Yeah. So again, I mean, I don't know what I'm supposed to be saying to that, but okay. Golf courses, dodgy business sometimes, especially in a recession.
Yeah. And another thing I would ask is, where do we draw the line in terms of discerning whether or not someone's trying to submarine the market, or if they're just having a couple years struggle, some negative growth, even some loss in capital, downsizing.
Yeah, I mean, it's a huge problem. Yeah, for sure.
So if this,
I mean, I guess, yeah, I don't know. Increase wages, increase fucking wages.
Increase wages.
Instead of pouring the money into the fucking money markets, which is just gonna. I mean, I understand why it's done. Okay, but nonetheless, I do think it's short-sighted. Certainly in this country, the government had an opportunity to nip it in the bud really early on and save the British taxpayer a lot of money, and they decided to go a slightly more expensive route. So I think we could have paid like 50 billion to bail out the first bank, and instead we chose to pay 750 billion to bail out the last bank, and all banks subsequent.
And that's another. I mean, I just don't want to wall that off and say that's another problem with the governmental process. But the government looks at the future as a commodity. That's just an endless commodity, because there's an endless amount of future. So
yeah, I get that, but it's not healthy. It really isn't. We went through many years in the 70s and 80s running in a deficit like that, and it's really bad for the currency.
So tell me,
it's really bad.
Yeah.
I mean, it led to anarchy here. I mean, riots on the streets, all sorts of problems.
Okay. Yeah, that's not good.
Yeah, it wasn't. It was a terrible time. A lot of people getting killed in police stations and on the streets, and the miners, right? I mean, 150 miners getting charged by a line of police horses.
Yeah, I did not know about that.
Yeah, man. Yeah, it was pretty. I think 2 of them died. I'm not certain. 1982, somewhere around there. Yeah, and shortly after that, the government decided to enact some policy which meant policemen didn't have to be identified.
That's fucked up.
Yeah, totally. 1985.
In an effort, I imagine under the guise of protecting the police.
Yeah. Yeah, because of all the riots and stuff.
Yeah.
A few policemen killed some very prominent figures. So there was a lot of backlash against the police, and I met those guys in '86, I think, at Stonehenge, and they just steamed a load of Hell's Angels.
Yeah.
I mean, totally. I smashed the fuck out of them and their bikes. But I mean, there was fucking shitloads of them. If I wasn't just, luckily I was a skinny white kid with really long hair, I didn't look anything like a biker.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, it was a fucking massacre.
Britain, I studied the UK a lot in a lot of my coursework. A lot about protectionist practices, particularly with the pound.
Yeah.
And basically how they kept fucking themselves over. They'd accuse the populace of being unpatriotic if they sold their pound.
Yeah, kind of.
And kind of like
more. There was more a kind of sustained kind of buy British. It was just like an anti-common market thing at the time.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I'm talking about in like the 1890s.
Oh, right, back then. Oh, yeah. God,
Yeah.
yeah. You're kidding me. Well, we invented the whole fucking thing, right?
Yeah.
Well, we didn't really. Of course, we like to think we did, but it was probably the Italians.
Well, the concept of currency as a commodity definitely has roots in the UK. Maybe not. Maybe it didn't start there, but there was definitely a time when the pound was the standard by which all of the currencies were weighed.
Oh yeah.
So there would go through, just like any free market commodity, the pound would go through stages of decline, and in an effort to curb the decline, the bankers and the politicians would accuse anyone who sold their pounds as being unpatriotic.
Yeah.
Off for
well, the French did the same thing during the Revolution.
Oh yeah, the Argentinians, the Russians.
The model that the UK sort of went through is a bit comical, because all of the things that happened to the UK economy, the British economy, English economy, even back then, right from Henry VIII's time, is all exactly the same that the Dutch went through and the Italians went through.
Oh yeah.
There were no lessons learned. I mean, the protectionist thing, they just did it out of, well, this is what everybody else does, right? Not realizing that it was the worst thing to do for your currency.
Right, and that's why it's so fucking scary, because we have a purported businessman, a self-acclaimed businessman who claims to know about money, preaching economic protectionism, and he does it because stupid people will vote for him if he says those things.
Yeah,
and that's what's fucking scary.
It doesn't really worry the rest of the world too much, because that's no change for America then.
Right.
So I don't think anybody really worries about it. I don't think we're going to get cheaper steel or anything like that. We weren't hoping anyway.
No, if anything, you get more expensive steel.
I don't think it'd be much more expensive than the Americans have made it right now.
All right.
Hence, we don't really buy a lot from America anymore.
Well, that was kind of our model, is to kind of flip it. When we say we run a trade deficit with China, not a lot of people really know what that is. It sounds scary that we run a trade deficit.
Well, it's huge as well, right?
Yeah.
It's like $750 billion or something.
Yeah, it's pretty sizable.
Yeah.
But what we're willing to pay for Chinese goods versus what China is willing to pay for our goods. We buy more stuff from them for less, and they buy less stuff from us for more.
Yeah.
That's basically what a trade deficit is. We work less hard, and we get more stuff.
That's one way of looking at it. Yes.
That's cut and dry what it is.
Well, yes, it is. You're right, because everybody benefits in trade.
Right.
So it's no biggie, but you got to understand that their cost of production is can be quite a variable thing. I mean, they can control it a lot more than the US can. They don't have unions. They don't have restrictive practices on work. They don't have, human rights to worry about. They don't have pollution laws to worry about.
And they got a couple billion people to choose from.
Well, they've also decided quite wisely, I guess, to separate the country into a capitalist zone. So it's a kind of experiment for them. So then they're not even full bore, right? I mean, they're going, I don't know, maybe 10% of what they could.
Yeah, they got their toes in the water.
Yeah, which just shows you how awesome the economy that they could generate is.
Yeah.
And that's cool, right? Because I kind of like the Chinese model of capitalist expansion is actually a little better than the Western model of capitalist expansion.
Well, I guess they have. I guess they have so much more to worry about.
Well, I wouldn't say that.
In terms of just the sheer number of people that.
Well, no, they don't have to worry. They've built cities which are still half empty.
Yeah.
It's incredible what they've done. Just amazing. But when they expand, they have very tight policies over like the local countries and stuff. But as they expand to get new resources, they tend to give a fairer price than the Western companies do.
Oh yeah.
Because they do it through a government, they don't do it through individual companies. So it's more structured. So they tend to move in as well. They tend to, kind of make it pay for itself almost by selling to the population and expanding their markets that way. Right, which companies don't do. Like the oil companies go to some place in Africa, and then you never hear of it. Right, whereas the same thing happens in China, and then they also move in with the clothes, the food, the hospitals, the manufacturing, the road manufacturing, everything. It all comes as a package. So it actually does real good for the local communities that are moving in, while still being, incredibly exploitative in terms of capitalistic endeavors. Very clever.
Yeah, I watched I don't know if it was a documentary or if it was just like a little 30-minute episode on an iPhone. They're making iPhones over there.
Yeah.
And basically, a person's life is they have a dorm. They sleep in their dorm, and they wake up. They have their iPhone, and most people are on their iPhone. When they're not working making iPhones, they're on their iPhone playing or doing whatever, playing whatever internet game. They spend most of their money on apps. And they go and they work their 10 hours, and then they go to the arcade or they go out to eat, and they might have Sunday off and then have beers, and and they go back to their dorm that's on campus. It's just
Well, it's a little more extreme than that even. I mean, they'll go for like working like 10 days straight and then still stay on site for like 3-4 months.
Oh yeah.
Have a couple of week offs where they go back to their village, which is hundreds of miles away. Have a couple of weeks off and then come back and do another 3-4 months, 6-month shift. I mean, it's that extreme, right?
But I guess to round it back to the conversation, what is more important is it more important that that a company is not allowed to practice such practices, or is it more important for the individual to be able to choose to be practiced on in such a way.
Well, there's no choice, is there? That's the bottom line. Unless you get together in political groups, you have no choice. Because you're in direct competition with, next door. Be under no illusion. Just because we have affluence where it doesn't seem that way, doesn't mean that isn't actually the case. And that's why neighborhoods die. I mean, look at 2009, 2010 in the States, right? Where whole communities were just completely dying on their, one person left on a road because everybody else had foreclosed on their property, I mean, That's quite a big sign, I think.
That's interesting.
It's a big sign.
Well, if I were being really difficult, I would say something like those people would need to break out and do something. What that thing is, I don't know, but
well, they did. I mean, they just got up and walked away from it.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just a whole load of corporate bullshit. They owe money. Well, fuck off,
But there's a point when let's say a Detroit factory worker's job becomes automated. There's a point in that worker's or former worker's life where they would have to decide if they're going to re-enter and learn something new,
sure,
learn something better versus.
Yeah, I mean, one would hope. I mean, that's the case.
Yeah.
I don't see any obligation other than is made to the companies by political organizations.
Yeah. So if
so again, it comes down to that political arm, and if it's not strong enough, then it's not strong enough.
Yeah.
I mean, these things are different in the States as well. I mean, I fully grant that. So my experiences are very, UK based, and that has a good social net, right? So a lot of these ideas are already accepted as being part of how we run things.
Well, we don't see it. We don't see it in terms of making a cell phone or making a car. But if you were to imagine every industry or every commodity as though it was confined to region, as if region had something to do with that commodity, like
it does, yeah. But carry on.
Yeah. So let's just take Florida for instance. There's a reason we get oranges from Florida, and if you start up an orchard in Florida and you start up an orchard in Michigan at the same time, the person in Michigan is eventually going to lose out to the person in Florida in terms of an orange orchard. So the good that comes from that is you get better oranges for less money from the people who know how to make oranges the best, from the place that makes the best oranges. The downside is you are left with your dick in your hand and you're like, okay, what do I do? The idea when it comes to free trade between two countries or between two states in this instances, the person in Michigan finds something that Michigan is good at. So,
sure.
So catching fish or
whatever it is,
whatever it is that Michigan is positioned for in the market, in the marketplace, whatever commodity they're positioned for best,
is what they ought
to produce. And it's hard to see this when we're talking about something that seemingly can be produced.
Cars. Yeah, go ahead.
Something like a cell phone or a car.
Yeah.
And that's hard to see. But usually,
yeah, I mean, I recognize that there are, advantages to this kind of thing.
Yeah, it's usually, not all the time, but usually the gains that the consumer reaps in terms of quality and price, from that outweigh the loss that they would incur.
Yeah, very much so. Yeah, very much so. I mean,
a producer of the same thing.
Yeah, very much so. We get lamb from Australia and shit like that, right?
They make the best lamb. The reason their lamb's better is because they usually tend to have smaller herds with smaller lambs. The smaller the lamb, the more tender, juicy.
Yeah. Well, we got some pretty good lambs over here, but Essex lambs, they're very nice. Salt marsh.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. You don't need to salt the meat. Right? It's
oh man, that's good.
It's beautiful. Anyway, but nonetheless, yeah, I think the time thing is a really good idea. That's what I really think.
The time thing in terms of what?
That labor theory value Mumblesworth. I can't remember now because it's getting too late, but I'm going to shoot off. But yeah.
Time just seems to be a universal unit of something.
Well, it ties it really nicely as well because, it ties it to what's important. I mean, I think that's the beauty of it. But, well, not the beauty of it. I'm sure there are other things, but it emphasizes the kind of circular path of chasing one's tail.
But do you think that time is really the way out of this sort of dilemma?
I do, yeah, for sure.
Because, well, let me throw something at you. What if you had two laborers and you paid them both the same wage? Let's say it wasn't an hour. Let's say it was a contract job.
Okay.
And you're paying each of them $100 a day to paint the fence.
Yeah.
And the second guy can paint the fence in an hour faster than the first guy.
Right.
Would that not motivate the first guy to paint the fence faster?
Okay. Yeah.
And you'd be paying them more money for less time as the person who's getting fences painted.
Right. I mean, yeah, sure. I mean, granted, but I can't see again, yes, and they're choosing to do that, right? So to spend less time but take the same amount of money.
Right.
Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I'm just seeing a scenario where the first guy gets to go home, play with his kids, bang his wife, and the second guy gets to go home to a cold dinner.
Yeah. Okay.
Kids asleep.
Well, I guess people are different, and I wouldn't necessarily think it matters in terms of the overall mean of it, right? I mean, we're only looking for an average amount. So yeah, I'm sure one person's slightly quicker than another, but he knows what's good for him. And in the real world, of course, he stays for that extra hour and makes it look like he's tidying up for an hour or something.
If they were getting paid hourly.
Well,
sure.
even if it's a thing, right? They still do that. People do that. I don't know, but that's assuming that he knows it's a 10-hour job, and he said it's 10 hours, mate.
Right.
But yeah, I don't know. Individual circumstances can change. I think relating labor into the value of the goods is an essential part. I'm beginning to get convinced of this. It's actually essential.
Yeah, it depends on how you define value.
Well, I don't think it does. No, this is why I don't actually think it does. I just think the necessity of doing it. I mean, clearly, value has got to be, I can't conceive of any thing which doesn't have some component of value which isn't labor orientated. I can't even see, to the point where I can't see why anybody would want to make a profit if it wasn't, if there wasn't some labor involved.
Yeah, the reason I said that is because sometimes value and price are synonymous, and other times value and price are not synonymous.
Right. Yeah. No, I wouldn't think they're synonymous. Right?
Yeah, there are some economists who think that there is no such thing as value, only price. I don't agree with those economists, but
right.
They define things. If you don't quantify it with a number, then it's just a.
Oh, I see. Right. Yeah. Okay. Well, no, you could do it that way, I suppose.
It's just a feeling.
Well, no, if you had some direct way of translating price into the amount of time someone took to earn that price.
Yeah.
You know.
And then
yeah.
And then on the back end, and then on the back end, if you have a price for a commodity that no one's willing to pay for it, then your labor theory of values really doesn't apply in terms of.
I think it does.
Applicable reality.
Well, I think it does. I mean, you still had to manufacture the goods, right?
Yeah,
so whether you actually get the price for them that they're worth, or whether you get a lesser price is kind of immaterial. It still has the value based upon the cost of the goods.
Yeah, I'd agree. It costs something.
Yeah.
I don't think that cost reflects value.
Really?
No. Because
value. Hang on. When you say value, there, do you mean the value, or do you mean value in general?
When I mean value.
Value in general. Okay.
Yeah, value. What someone is willing to pay for it.
Yeah. Well, that's an arbitrary figure. I mean, yeah.
Right. So if I'm
that just makes it. Yeah. But if somebody's willing to pay something, doesn't mean that they're going to be sold it, does it?
Right. So I mean, if I made a piece of paper and my goal is to sell that piece of paper for as much money as possible.
Right.
Regardless of what the labor theory of value would determine its value in terms of the cost of labor. But I can only sell that piece of paper for as much as someone is willing to pay for.
Right. This is where I disagree. No, you're going to sell the piece of paper was manufactured by somebody.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So that therefore guarantees a minimum that you're going to sell it for. You wouldn't sell it for any less than that, would you?
Well, this is where we talk about operating at a loss. I mean, there are companies that operate at a loss out of necessity.
Yeah. Well, only out of the necessity of unethical practice, for sure. But no, that's capitalism it works on a profit motive, and nobody would be motivated to earn a loss.
Right, and so now so if we talk about the cost of labor as what is defined by is what defines the value of a commodity, then you're really just you can shift it over to that and say what are you willing to pay what you're willing to pay for labor
Mhm.
versus what a laborer is willing to be paid
Mhm.
To do the job.
Yeah.
And then that determines. Does that make sense? Because your goal is to,
Yeah. Of course it does. That's the point of it.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that is the point of it. It's that it's pointing out there's a discrepancy between those 2 points. That the value to the employer is always more than the value to the employee. Otherwise, the employer wouldn't employ the person.
Yeah.
So there's always going to be this surplus, as it's being referred to, I think, under a capitalist system, always. And if there isn't, then, it goes under. Or, innovates. Or exploits labor.
Yeah.
And by exploit, we just mean get cheaper. Of course, we don't mean torture the wife.
Yeah.
Although torturing the wife may be the consequence. Well, it certainly was back in the day, right? When things were really tough, right? After the war, when wife beating was not just a common practice, but almost a national sport in this country.
Oh, God.
Mm. Anyway.
I think that's good. We had a good little talk.
Yeah, man. That was fun. Managed to get a few jokes out there.
No, yeah. We differed, found common ground, had a good talk.
Sure thing.
I really wanted to be in on this earlier so I could have gotten the whole thrust of it, but
to be honest, I've only just learned it from Jack during these hangouts.
Oh yeah.
So, yeah, I'm still a little unsure still, really. I mean, I know I've always agreed with it. I did a bit of economics. And my father was a lecturer.
Oh, okay.
Did a master's in economics and that kind of thing. Used to teach it. So, yeah, it was kind of yes, son. But why I turned out to be a Marxist, I don't know, because I'm not sure he was. In fact, I'm pretty sure he wasn't. Anyway, I'm going to head off to bed. Thank you very much indeed. Especially thank you to Helena. Especially thank you to Jack. Thank you, Stuart. And I'll see you all later.